Welcome back to the ProSource podcast, everybody. Today I am sitting here with one of our very own Trade Pro members, Tracy Mee. She is the owner over at ProPath LLC, located in the Oklahoma City area. Tracy brings decades of design experience to her work, taking a thoughtful, big picture approach to commercial and corporate interiors, from reimagining floor plans to selecting materials, furniture, and art. She helps organizations create spaces that are functional, cohesive, and built to perform for the people who use them every single day. Tracy, thank you so much for coming on. It's a
Sure.
pleasure having you.
Thank you. It's fun to do this.
Yes. And today's episode, we're really just going to learn more about you, your business, how you got started. And then I thought we could, of course, talk about some remodeling trends. And I'm actually really excited to have you on because I don't know if we've had a Trade Pro member that exclusively just works on commercial projects.
Okay.
So it'll be cool to get that different side of the industry in here with that knowledge. But before we dive into those trends, I know you've had a long and layered design career from working alongside your mom in the residential design world to now leading the fully commercial focused firm. Can you walk us through your path into design and how you started your business in 2017?
Sure. I would have to say, honestly, my path into design, it's always been my life. I mean, even from a young, child, I was always drawing, sketching, painting, like designing things. And it's just a part of me. And then growing up, my mother was a really very big interior decorator in downtown Chicago. So I grew up around that. And I'm, certain that obviously had an impact on me, whether I knew it or not at the time. In college, I was a merchandising marketing major. And I think even at the time, I was thinking more like retail, in fashion design, which I kind of did go into for a while. After I graduated undergrad, I was in retail management, and then I was a buyer for a couple of stores. Then I actually went to Paris and went to Parsons School of Design for my graduate work, then became an illustrator for couture designers. But that was at that point in my life, that was very, very heavy in into fashion design in the fashion world. Left Paris, came back, got married. Still, was like, oh, what am I going to do? And, actually started a children's clothing line. So I designed a children's clothing line, had a showroom in Dallas. And then my husband and I, we got pregnant with our first child. And that kind of, put the brakes on a lot of career stuff. At that point, my family was my focus. Although I was still kind of doing some work with my mom, residentially. And that was still filling, a need. And, it was still a creative outlet for me. Really got involved in landscape design too, kind of at that point. So there I shifted again, it was just another creative outlet for me, and really learned a lot about, plants and horticulture and all that. So I was doing a lot of work professionally, not only just, for, residential landscapes, but also I was doing some like restaurants, professional buildings, like I was doing their outside landscaping. Then probably the next thing for me, which sadly, my husband and I got a divorce. And I was kind of in a place where I was like, okay, I've got to really figure this out. And that was really kind of the birth of ProPath. And I just decided that I, wanted to do that, what I knew I was good at and what I loved. And hopefully it would be, profitable too. And that was really kind of when I, focused back into residential interiors. And then how ProPath really switched into the commercial corporate world I got married again, and been married now for 5 years. And my husband now, he's in commercial real estate. He needed help. He needed a lot of help when it came to really doing interiors, not only just, build outs for the buildings themselves or for tenants. And, he would be restructuring, leases and all these kinds of things. And they would be asking for, well, we want, this office to be renovated, or we want all new, we need a new break room or whatever. And so when it came to, well, who was designing all of these things for you, and who was picking out all these materials? Well, they were winging it. He and his partners were winging it. And it was awful.
Yeah.
It was the most hideous stuff I've ever seen. And I was like, we got to talk.
You need help.
So that was really kind of how it became about. And so he hired me, my company, and I've been doing. That's really how I got into the commercial side of interior
Wow,
design.
that's cool.
Yeah, and now I do. I still do a lot for him in terms of his buildings and the tenants. But now I have a lot of tenants. Those tenants, they'll reach out to me and hire me now for other specific things. It's really
That's
just
cool.
evolved and it's grown. So, but that's I would have
Naturally
to say,
evolved too, I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like.
definitely, definitely. And I would have to say that's really pretty much how it happened. So here I am in the commercial
Yeah.
interior world.
No, that is cool how I feel like you probably never expected to be here back when you were in Paris, right? Studying fashion.
Very true.
And then
Very true.
looking, ahead, you probably didn't think you'd be where you're at now, but you seem really happy about it. And you're actually not the first pro I've had on that had a background in fashion design. I
Really?
feel like sometimes there's a through line from designing clothes to designing homes. Because
Yep.
I've had like I think two other interior designers on
Wow, that's
that
cool.
have done that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too because I feel like commercial spaces are there's a focus too on like how it looks. It's important that everything looks cohesive and there's a welcoming aura about it, right? But it's also comes down to function too. Like when people are trying to get their work done, they want everything to function properly. So
Yes,
it's interesting
definitely.
how you went from kind of with fashion, it's very flashy. There's obviously function there, but it's all about how it looks. And same with maybe residential too. And then now you're at something that's way more about the functionality of it. Do you think that challenges your creativity, or how does that like relate to your creativity and success going from residential to commercial?
Yeah, well, everything that you just said is so true because residential interior design, it is. It's way dramatic. It's way more glamorous. It's way more flashy. There's flair, there's style, there's just, massive impact aesthetically and all of that where, in the corporate commercial world, you really don't have that because it really is about function and reliability and you've got to have a space that works for either it could be two people or it could be 200 people in the company or whatever. So there is a shift there. You still have to be creative. You
Mm-hmm.
still have to come up with ideas and ways to make something work for, like I said, these 5 people or these 50 people. So you still have to be very creative, and I think it maybe is also more problem solving is really what it
Yeah, absolutely.
what you're working towards is you know for example, let's say I've got there's a new tenant coming in to one of a building, and they've got um, you know 10 current employees, but they're growing, and they know that within a year to a year and a half they're going to be probably hiring anywhere from 10 to 20 more people. So you really have to think about, okay, well, I've got to come up with something for the existing 10 people, but also what I have to create for something that's going to work down the road and how that all is going to come together and integrate, and
Oh,
flow.
I see.
So there still is a lot of creativity involved. It's just not exciting. It's just more,
Yeah,
it's just more brass tacks.
for sure. And I was just thinking of this too. I have you seen maybe there be a shift in the last maybe since COVID? I feel like since COVID, a lot of businesses have turned into either hybrid, where they're coming into the office half the
Yeah.
week, at home the other half the week, or completely remote. But I know in recent years, there's been this shift of companies trying to get their employees back into the office. So have you seen that, I guess, influence how companies are looking at their spaces? And maybe they want to update their space to kind of pull those employees back into coming into the office. Because I feel like maybe there's been like and I could be totally wrong on this, but there's been a pressure of employees are expecting, okay, if you're making us come back into the office, it needs to be updated. And
Sure.
I want it to be a place that looks that I want to be working in, right? Have you seen
Yeah.
that affect anything at all?
Yeah, definitely. And I would even also say that, just from listening to my husband, who, being a commercial real estate guy for his whole life, there was a big trend right after COVID where people were leaving wanting out of their homes and back into an office, which for him was great,
Yeah,
because before COVID, when everybody was living and working at home, it was not good for the commercial real estate,
I'm
industry at
sure.
all, because people were leaving their offices and staying home. Yeah, from that aspect, definitely, people were kind of, flooding back to an office space. Yeah, you did have to, a lot of the people that were maybe still doing hybrid, half and half. And, I think a lot of the trend was let's make offices more inviting. Let's make them more, appealing to some of these people that, because we do want, people back in these offices. And I think that really was probably, you know, how the commercial real estate world probably, worked leases, to get more tenants to probably sign longer leases. Was like, look, we'll make all these renovations for you. You sign a 10-year lease and we'll do this, X, whatever.
Yeah,
So I think that was probably where a lot of that was seen, to really get
absolutely.
people back into office buildings so they weren't sitting empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they don't look like they're from 1990 anymore.
Yeah, right, right. And we've had a lot of the buildings that I have worked on, they might have been built in the 60s, and maybe they weren't, in terms of like decor and interior, haven't been touched since 1980, and the things that
Yeah,
obviously that were, cool and trendy back then, nope, not so much. So yeah,
yeah.
definitely have my work cut out for me.
No, for sure. Because I know you mentioned when we were communicating before this podcast, you kind of do a little bit of everything. You're kind of like a one-woman show. You're part architect, part designer, art consultant. You're doing a little bit of everything. What does your typical, I know not every day is typical. It's probably very different every day. But what does a typical day look like when you're starting on a project?
How it really goes is, I'll get handed kind of like just a packet of, here's a new tenant, they're moving in, or they just signed a lease. These are the things that they have requested that we do. Maybe they want a bigger break room. Maybe they want, they need a bigger conference room, and the space that they want to lease doesn't have that. So I'll get the as built, floor plan, the architectural floor plan, and, manipulate, okay, if we take out that wall, this will create, a much bigger space for their conference room. Or they need, whatever it is that they need, we can manipulate, the space to achieve that. And then the next step is typically, okay, we got to figure out what kind of flooring do they want, is it a heavily trafficked area, are they going to have a lot, is this a company that has a lot of clients coming in? Do they have a lot of clients? How much foot traffic is going to be there? So you got to make sure your flooring, is going to be able to withstand that kind of wear and tear. So there's those decisions. And then of course you want to figure out, what's the color palette, and typically I will just say, up in front, to, whoever is the person in charge of making those decisions for that company, or, the tenant, are you, are we grays? Are we, warm tones? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, I just want something, I like gray, or I like
Yeah,
blues, or I'm good with tans and, earth tones, whatever. So it just kind of gives me a direction on really what, where to start selecting colors and things. And then we just, after we nail down flooring and paint colors, then we move to furniture, and then artwork, and just, kind of accessories and those types of things. And a lot of times, and I will have to say, most of the time, the tenants that I work with really don't care,
yeah. I was gonna ask.
okay. So the flip side of working, working with a residential client versus
Hmm.
working with a commercial, corporate client, obviously, yes, there are pros and cons to both. But one of the beauties and one of the things that I do love about being more in the commercial, interior world is that, you don't have to deal with the people. You don't have to deal
Yeah,
with,
for sure.
a homeowner. You hire, they hire you, and then they wear you out. They absolutely
Yeah,
emotionally can wear you out. And I really don't have that. Like, they just, they'll say, here's what we've got. This is your budget. Just do it for us. So
yeah,
it's nice. It's really nice, because then
yeah,
I can just do my job, and I have the leeway to kind of pick the things that I think, that are going to look good in the space. So that's really kind of how it flows. And of
No,
course,
that's
there will be
awesome.
some things here and there. I mean, this just happened for, a case in point here. We had a tenant, we were redoing a break room for them. And then when it was coming to the millwork, which we were doing, all their cabinetry, we had uppers, lower cabinets. Do you want a dishwasher? Do you, are you going to have an ice maker? Do you want to, your under counter beverage fridge? And I had the whole thing specked out, and these are custom cabinets, right? And then they come around and they're like, oh, we really didn't, we would much rather have this over here. So there are going to be,
Yeah.
there are going to be some snacks. And so then you're like, well, this has already gone to production, so
Yeah.
you still have some of those things, but I would say for the most part, obviously, if there's any structural changes that a tenant wants or a client wants, you start there, of course, and then
Yeah.
you just from the ground up, basically. It's
No,
really
for
how it
sure. And
goes.
I know all of our members work with ProSource in a variety of different ways at different
Mhm.
stages of their project. At what point do you turn to ProSource and utilize that partnership for your projects?
Well, once I kind of have an idea of, what the flooring's going to be, is it going to be, luxury vinyl tile? Is it going to be, commercial grade carpet? Are we going to have ceramic tile? Are we going to have, whatever it is? Once the materials are what they are going to be, then I go to ProSource and work with my rep Tara, and start selecting those specific things, and then of course in the color palettes that we've already decided what that's going to be. And the great thing about ProSource is, for I have yet to have to say, oh wow, you just don't really have what I'm looking for, I'm going to go to another vendor or another manufacturer. Or I mean, they are very, very, very on top of current trends and the variety of materials, whether it be flooring or whether it be tiles, whether it be like for showers or or backsplashes, whatever. There is, it's the variety is endless. So for me, I they've always had what I need. And they are really good about saying, hey, this is something new that we just got in, this is something new from Shaw Carpet, or this is something new from Dow Tile. This is, so they're up on all the trends. I really
That's
do rely
awesome.
on them for that.
That's awesome. I was going to ask if ProSource, partnering with ProSource gave you any confidence in your projects, and it seems like you just kind of answered my question.
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like that's a yes, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't, look around, and I'm not, there are other companies that rep different lines and things like that. But I would say for me, and being here in Oklahoma City, there is no competitor to ProSource. I mean, they
Oh, that's
just,
awesome.
yeah, I mean, they just have, the showroom, it's massive, and you walk in and there, sometimes it's almost, it gets hard to choose because there's
It's
too much to choose
overwhelming,
from. So
which is a
what I
good
would like
problem, I think.
yeah, it is. It is. It's so
Better to
it's
have too
exactly. So it's
much.
a good problem to have, and they are, yeah, ProSource has been a huge help to
No,
me
that's
and for my
awesome.
business. Absolutely, yeah.
And we were talking a little bit about the art and furniture, kind of like the finishing pieces of what you do. How do those final layers elevate the space from being functional to intentional? And would you say that is like your favorite part of the project at all? Because for me, I would say that's my favorite part, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
Yeah, I would say I would say that it could probably might be my favorite part, only because it does give you that little bit of flair. It does give you a little bit of, okay, we're not in just some sterile, office space. It is an actual, you do get a little bit of style when you start plugging in furniture, and of course artwork too. Commercial spaces get trickier when the bigger the company, because you have to appeal to a lot of people. Like you can select, and especially when it comes to art, because art is very, very, very subjective, right? I mean, and beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So it's like what you might think is, okay, wow, this is really, really cool, and this would look great here. And I love the subject matter, whether it be whatever, maybe it's still life of flowers or what, or nature or something. The next person that works by there is going to go, oh my God, I hate that. That's so gross. Or that's so boring. Or why would somebody put that there? But that's when, it does get challenging. But I think with those pieces though, the furniture and the art, yeah, it is the final layer, and it does kind of, it can soften the space, so you don't feel like you're walking into some cold, machine business, office type feel. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And would you say, have you had any clients of yours? I know you talked about how usually they're just trusting you with the vision and everything. They're kind of letting you do your own thing, which is great. Have you ever had any instances where there is a tenant or client that is like, "Hey, we need to make this piece of artwork work somewhere in the space,"
Mhm.
or like this has to be up? And how do you like maneuver the rest of the design, the remodel around a one specific piece of art or like even a logo?
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Yes, that has happened. And so far, I've not really had a problem with it. Like, I haven't had like a case where it was like either impossible to do, or it just didn't work, or nobody was happy with how we ended up. I mean, it's luckily, it's worked out. But there have been cases where I've had, the company, like specifically like with a logo. And it's like, we've got to have it right here. It's got to be, right here when you walk in, and we want it backlit, or we want, whatever it is, if they're going to have it, some people even like have, like a mosaic done, of their company logo or whatever. And I would say honestly, for the most part, like I said, it has not been too difficult to do that. But there are some people that are in, companies and corporate world that they do have a sense of style, and they do have a sense of, sophistication when it comes to, materials or colors, or aesthetically how something, how your eye visually, sees something. So, and I welcome that. I don't, want that to
Yeah,
not be the case. I do like that because, it does, in a way, sometimes it does make my job easier, because then they can say, hey, we really like this, we really want that, these are the things that, it helps, it gets a lot of the legwork out of the way. Because a lot of times when
absolutely.
somebody says, oh boy, I don't know, then I got to bring a lot of samples over in all color palettes, all different materials. So it's a lot of lugging around stuff.
Mhm.
It's a lot of groundwork that has to be done first to finally just get to one point where, okay, we nailed down the furniture. I mean, the materials and the finishes and the colors. Now now we can really move forward. So sometimes it is easier when somebody knows what they
Yeah.
want, you know, um,
Yeah.
and then I can just say, okay, great. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'll grab a few things and let's meet next week, and you can take a look at these samples. It's kind of a give and take, but when those things happen, like I said, to me, it's not something that I just go, oh, here we go.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's
So
just a different situation,
yeah,
probably.
yeah,
That,
yeah.
like you said, could be nice because they're at least giving you some kind of direction, right? And you're not just
Yes.
totally
Right.
hoping and guessing that what you're
Yeah.
doing they're gonna
Right.
they're gonna vibe with.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure with like, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's the tenant that kind of knows what they like, but they're really not sure. So they're like, well, can you just bring me some things to look at? And then they're like, no, I don't like any of that. Can you bring me some more things to look at? No, I really don't like. So that's the client that you go, oh, it's the ones that just
Yeah,
say, I don't know and I don't care, just do it. And then it's the one that's like, hey, this is really what I really love this. And I love this color, and I love this style of look, and then so those are the, I guess it's like the bell curve, right?
yeah,
It's those two clients are the ones that are the easiest really to work with.
for sure.
Yeah.
No, I feel like that probably is the same with residential too, like across the board.
Yes, for sure. It's pretty rare to find a residential client that does
It
it, that
doesn't
says,
care.
right,
Yeah,
that just says,
that's
hey,
true.
just go do it. Just spend all my money. I don't care. Yeah,
Yeah,
that doesn't ever happen. But that'd be,
for
I don't
sure.
know. At least it
That'd
never
be
happened for
cool.
me. Yeah.
Comment below if that's happened to you. Let us know.
Yes, right, right.
So, when you're looking at the future of commercial design, what trends or shifts are you paying close attention to right now? As we're going into 2026, are you seeing any new trends pop up or anything staying the same, or what do you think?
Oh, I would say honestly, in the commercial world, There's really not. I would say really probably mostly if there's really a trend or anything that's going to change the most, it's going to be color palettes. That's really, like for a long while, countertops were, white or really light gray, and that was just kind of the standard. And then it was like, okay, you started to see like, some really dark color, countertop surfaces, like whether it was like, whether it be quartz or, any type of solid surface, but like darker colors were coming along. So I would have to say, for me, I do pay attention to kind of color trends. That also will translate into, the flooring, like carpet colors. Like for a while, everything was gray. You couldn't find anything that was like warm tan, beige, or brown. And because that's not what people wanted in their offices, and you couldn't find it. So for sure, colors will always, I think, be a trend. But other than that, I mean, you still have to stick with, commercial grade flooring, whether it's carpet or real wood, from, or even the luxury vinyl tile. Those are the things that I think, for me, of course, it depends upon, what's the traffic? How heavy is the traffic going to be in this space? Because you can't have, carpet wear out after 2 years, or you don't want, wood flooring to be scraped and scuffed and, because there's such high traffic. So, those are the other things that I think. And again, that's all, from like a manufacturer standpoint. I mean, a lot of manufacturers of these types of materials, they have to think of that in mind too when they're manufacturing something that's got to be durable and, or waterproof, those types of things. So I would have to say that those are really the trends that I see, is mostly colors and then just how things are made, probably.
Yeah. I could totally see the trend of just modernizing office spaces continuing post-COVID,
Yeah.
like we were talking about earlier. And I feel like my generation or younger generations coming up are wanting color back into spaces. Like we've seen that a lot in homes. And I could see that happening in the commercial spaces too, even though obviously, like you mentioned, there's guidelines that you have to follow. But like I don't know, I feel like Gen Z is expecting a more fun environment.
Yeah,
I could see companies moving towards that to try to convince them to come into the office.
for
So
sure.
they're not
For
wanting
sure.
work from home,
Yeah.
especially with the younger generation.
Yeah. And I would say too, and maybe what you just made me think of something is, a lot of very modern and really cool techniques of, like, say how a desk could, say it could transform into something else, like whether a
Yeah.
desk could flip out and be two chairs, like those
Yeah.
really cool things. Like people are designing those things, and
Oh, okay.
that to me, those are the things that are very, very interesting. Soundproof, like little, like individual, like little cubbies that
Yeah.
are, you know what I mean, like, or look,
Yep.
you're like, man, I want to sit in there and I want to work because that looks so cozy and so comfortable and it's soundproof or whatever. But
Yes.
then let's just say once you're in there, like you've got all these crazy things that flip down, or, the table goes all the way up and hides into the side. You know what I mean? So those are
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
some cool things too that I really like to, and I would love to implement those things, with, some of my clients. But again, it's a need, that's a need basis thing. Do you have
Yeah.
a company that wants to be perceived as this really forward thinking modern company? Those are going to be the clients for me that want to do those types of, kind of wild, crazy things.
Yeah. You
But
were
then those
talking about
things,
like the soundproof room. The last company I worked at, we had those installed too.
yeah,
Like
yeah, they're
little,
cool.
like
Yeah,
solo working areas.
yeah, and they're
And
like
they were great.
all, yeah,
Yeah.
they're like all felt in there, but they've got like a,
Yeah.
really cool, like, these tucked away cool, like recessed lights. Yeah, they're kind
Yeah,
of fun.
no, I thought it was perfect because like we're on a Zoom, like a Zoom type of call right now. When we were on a Zoom call with a vendor or someone outside the company, we didn't want to sit at our desk with everyone else hearing or us interrupting other people talking on the phone. So we would go in there and schedule that room. So even just like something
Exactly.
small like that really made a big difference in our work environment. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good thing to
Yeah.
note on too, is
Yeah.
the functionality of different places. And you
Yeah.
even mentioned earlier, having a space of 10 employees, but in a year there's going to be 50 employees there. How do we design it so that when that time comes, we can utilize the space to its full capacity? And those little functional desk like you were talking about, something like that that could be broken from one space into multiple spaces could work
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's cool stuff like that out there. I mean, that kind of stuff's being, people are creating that and manufacturing that. And it's yeah, it's neat. It's really cool. And plus it utilizes, the space better. And that's the other thing
Yeah.
too that I have to think of is, I've only got, say I've got, 2,500 square feet here. I've got to make this work for a break room, a conference room, and 15 employees. So,
Hmm.
it's again, then that kind of goes back to your question about, creativity. You have to really be thoughtful and creative in how do I maximize this space,
Yeah.
with these needs getting met, and this budget given to me to make it all happen. So, yeah, it's challenging. So yeah, so I'm definitely, my brain is definitely getting used. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Is there anything exciting that you have coming up for the rest of the year for your business, or any goals you have for the next couple of years where you'd want to work in next?
Um, I would say probably, I mean, I anticipate this year being a lot of what it is already and has been, which is just because like you said, about more and more people, even, coming out of COVID now, what we're 6 years out of 7 year or 5 years out of COVID, more and more people are wanting office space. So I think this is going to just. I think I'll still be pretty busy. But I would say for myself, my future sites are. I really would love to start doing more architectural design and like designing homes or office buildings. And so instead of doing, really the interior, I would really like to design the structure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
cool.
that's something that I have yet to do that I haven't scratched that itch yet. So that might
Yeah,
be
but it
my
all
next
starts
endeavor.
with, yeah, it starts with your vision, and you already know what that is. So I think you'll be able to
Yeah.
do it. That's
Well,
very
I don't
cool.
know. I hope.
You got to just manifest that it will happen, right?
Exactly. That's right. Positive thinking. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise about commercial design. I know I really enjoyed just learning more about it. And I know that our Trade Pro members, anyone listening to this podcast, also were able to retain a lot of good information about it.
I hope it does and will, and help somebody out. I think it's like anything, though. It's if you like doing it, you'll stay in it, and you'll love it, and it will be fulfilling, and and all of that, and it is fulfilling. I mean, yes, there's headaches, but there's headaches in everything. No matter what your job is, there's always going to be a headache here and there. But
Yeah.
it
If someone's looking for your services and they're in the Oklahoma City, how do they reach you? How do they hire you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm so busy, honestly, that I mean, I know this is going to sound terrible. I told you, I don't even have a website. Um, um,
If you don't
y-
need one, hey,
well, I know, but I really probably should. It's my work truly has just been such, it's grown from word of mouth, and
yeah, that's the best
I
way.
really do. I've got more than I can say grace over right now. But well, my email is just propathlLC@gmail.com.
I'll put your email in the episode description so anyone
Okay, great.
listening, if you're
And
in the
my
Oklahoma City
and also
area,
too, you can if you list my cell phone number too, because that is my business
perfect.
number
I will
as
do
well.
that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay,
That'd be great.
perfect.
All right.
Well, thank you so much.